June 10, 2025. The Alaska Highway, usually alive with the hum of trucks, was eerily silent. At Beaver Creek, Yukon, American trucks idled in a long, unmoving line. Drivers gathered, staring at new signs. Commercial access to Alaska Highway temporarily restricted. All U.S. commercial vehicles subject to provincial tolls. It wasn't a wall, but it was just as impassable. In Alaska, families woke to the news. Their state, suddenly cut off, was now an island. The highway was their lifeline for food, medicine, and supplies. Now, it was squeezed shut. In Whitehorse, Canadian officials enforced Ottawa's orders with grim resolve. No one celebrated, everyone braced for what came next. For veteran truckers like Dave Jensen, the closure felt like betrayal. His load of fresh produce would rot before reaching Alaska. Drivers spoke quietly of lost income, missed deliveries, and families at home. Politics felt distant. The crisis was immediate. They were the first casualties, stranded at a border that once symbolized friendship. No soldiers, no tanks, just ordinary people caught in a trade war. The Yukon's wilderness, usually a place of adventure, had become a geopolitical chessboard. The closure was a silent declaration of war, sending shockwaves from Washington and Ottawa to Alaskan kitchens and truck cabs. The Great Northern Road, once a symbol of connection, was now the front line of a bitter feud. This crisis had deep roots. In early 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump stunned allies by slapping a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, claiming to protect American jobs. Canada saw it as economic warfare. Prime Minister Trudeau called it a very dumb thing to do and promised swift retaliation. Tariffs and counter-tariffs flew, fracturing decades of trust. Canadian leaders felt cornered. BC's Premier David Eby accused Trump of trying to annex Canada. The dispute became about sovereignty, not just trade. In the U.S., Trump's supporters cheered. In Canada, unity hardened against American bullying. Provinces joined the pushback. Ontario threatened electricity surcharges, Yukon cut U.S. liquor purchases, and BC prepared its own counterstrike. The final spark, BC passed the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act, authorizing tolls on U.S. trucks heading to Alaska. The Alaska Highway, a vital U.S. supply route, ran through Canadian territory. By targeting it, Canada turned a national dispute into a regional crisis. The move aimed straight at Alaska, making the conflict personal for thousands. The powder keg was lit. The continent's closest partnership was now a battleground. At the heart of the standoff were three leaders. In Washington, President Trump watched the crisis escalate. His tariffs, meant as leverage, had backfired. Now Alaska was isolated, and the political cost was rising. Trump's public silence was telling. He was calculating his next move. In British Columbia, Premier David Eby became the face of Canadian resistance. Calm, but resolute, he defended the tolls as a shield for BC's economy. "We did not ask for this trade war, but we will fight for BC with every tool we have," Eby declared. He turned a regional issue into an international crisis, challenging a superpower. In the U.S. Senate, Alaska's Dan Sullivan became the avenger. He warned BC not to mess with Alaska, and proposed waiving the Passenger Vessel Services Act, a threat to BC's cruise industry. The leaders' moves defined the conflict. Trump, the instigator, now on the defensive. Eby, the strategist, wielding leverage. Sullivan, ready to strike back. It was high-stakes political chess. The fate of the Alaska Highway and the U.S. Canada relationship hung on their decisions. Each move raised the stakes. The world watched, waiting for someone to blink. The next move could change everything. On the ground, the blockade's impact was immediate. In Anchorage, Sarah Jenkins found empty shelves where her children's favorite apples once sat. The trade war was no longer abstract, it was about feeding her family. In Tok, Alaska, diners and gas stations sat empty. The town's economy, tied to highway traffic, was in free fall. Store owners worried about payroll. Truckers wondered how long they could hold out. Across the border in Whitehorse, Yukoners rallied in support of their government, waving flags and chanting, "Yukon stands with Canada." Pride mixed with worry. Many had friends and family in Alaska. The blockade hurt neighbors on both sides. In Victoria, BC, officials watched data streams, but the real story was in grocery aisles and quiet diners. Political decisions had human consequences. The empty shelves in Alaska were a direct result of choices made far away. The world's interconnections, and its fragility, were on full display. BC's plan was simple but devastating. Use weigh stations to enforce steep tolls on U.S. trucks bound for Alaska. The Alaska Highway, the only practical land route, was now a choke point. For American trucking, it was a logistical nightmare. High-value, time-sensitive goods, produce, medicine, equipment, depended on this road. The tolls sent costs soaring, especially for small companies. For drivers it was more than money, it was a broken promise. The highway, built in WB2 as a symbol of unity, was now a weapon. Every driver became an unwilling tax collector in a trade war they never started. The ripple effects spread. Seattle logistics managers scrambled for alternatives, but air and sea routes were slow and costly. A Juneau grocer waited for milk that would arrive late and overpriced. The cost of politics was paid by ordinary people, at the cash register. The tolls choked commerce and strained communities. The price of the dispute was measured in miles, misery, and dollars. Alaska's leaders struck back, targeting BC's tourism lifeline. Senator Dan Sullivan proposed waiving the Passenger Vessel Services Act, letting cruise ships bypass Canadian ports and sail directly from Seattle to Alaska. Billions in tourism dollars and thousands of BC jobs were suddenly at risk. The threat sent panic through Victoria and Vancouver. The summer's record-breaking cruise season was in jeopardy. Memories of the pandemic's empty docks haunted business owners. The dispute had moved from land to sea, exposing the deep economic ties between the two nations. The U.S. needed Canada's land, Canada needed U.S. maritime law. Sullivan's gambit was a checkmate move, forcing BC to weigh its tolls against a potential tourism collapse. The region held its breath. The next move could devastate either side. Who would blink first? Amid the political chess, ordinary voices told the real story. Frank, an American trucker, waited at the Yukon border. "I've hauled medical supplies for Anchorage, now I'm the enemy? My cargo's expiring while politicians argue." In Vancouver, a shop owner reliant on cruise tourists said, "Trump started this. If the ships stop, my business is finished. But we can't just roll over." In Alaska, a teacher posted online, "Our school's weekly food truck didn't come. We're rationing fruit." How do you explain a trade war to a 6-year-old? Canadian officials felt conflicted. "I'm proud to stand firm, but my cousin's in Skagway. We're all northern folk. This feels like building a wall between family." The blockade's emotional toll was deep. Anger, fear, and a sense of betrayal on both sides. The border, once open and friendly, now felt like a wound. The human cost was measured in lost trust and anxious hearts. People felt forgotten, caught between governments. The crisis was no longer about policy, it was about lives. The voices of the North echoed with frustration and fear. The cracks in the relationship were personal, not just political. The border's openness was now a memory. The cost of conflict was written on every face. As the standoff dragged on, hope flickered amid the chaos. Empty shelves in Alaska and the threat of empty harbors in BC forced both sides to reconsider. Quiet back-channel talks began, seeking a way out. The crisis was a harsh lesson. Even the closest allies can be pushed to the brink by pride and miscommunication. Every action, tariff, toll, or threat had unpredictable, far-reaching consequences. The true cost was not just economic, but the erosion of trust in daily life. A real resolution would require more than removing tariffs. It would demand rebuilding respect and cooperation. The people of the North understood their fates were linked. The Alaska highway blockade became a cautionary tale. The hardest roads to build are those that connect us as neighbors and friends. These bridges are easy to burn, and must be guarded with care.